I read Joseph, and then I read Wonder, right? Like that's a pretty clear, like, meets doesn't, but then to break it down more, how would you articulate
How to
what
give
depth
her
means?
instructions to get where he is.
Because that's the next step, is like, what does reteaching look like? You say, not only like, hey, see this, right? But also like, how does she approach to know like the depth of understanding as a 10th grader, right? To do the critical thinking, like what is required of me, so.
Do you have the rubric that
I have,
Because I think that's part of that, I think is
right here.
helping students, yeah. I mean, like the rubric we gave them was really simple because I didn't want them to get bogged down. It's up here.
So you can explain this, I'm almost there.
Right.
So like I'm looking at an answer right now to 3, I guess it would be 3C, or 3F. So like it's like the last part. The
Yeah.
student didn't like divide,
Which is totally fine.
his answer up.
Mhm.
But I think it's just this last sentence
Yeah.
here. It says, I agree with Martin Luther King Jr. because even if there's stuff like racism in the world, people can be forgiven for that, even if they don't change. So it's like he might be getting it, but I'm like not really sure from that
Right.
response.
Right.
And in a way, I almost wonder like, is he just talking about racism because it's an MLK quote?
Right.
Like, does this show me, I'm not sure. You know, it's like, it,
Well, and how do they change? That's
Yeah.
what's missing is like the whole quote is about how people change and why people change, and that piece is missing there. It's just people do. So it's missing the tie.
So students would have to say how and why. What would be sufficient, I suppose, that like I met I wanna say burden, but you know what I mean? Like to try to like unpack it of what does that mean then?
I mean, like in the rubric, even just like giving, like, we strongly encourage students to give examples, even if they weren't personal, like real world examples of how that's seen. And so that would clearly demonstrate, like saying racism isn't really an example.
right.
So that's like a really concrete way that you can show that or explain that.
And I think them describing a situation, does it clearly represent redemption or just someone being nice?
Yeah.
And that's a really
Like, is
specific
that
comment for that
change?
paper, but I think
Yeah.
that's the difference. Like,
Yeah.
just giving an example is not enough. Does your example fit this
Yeah.
idea?
Right.
And
Yeah,
that might be some unpacking we need to do.
The other example I read was also, it was a stronger example, but also kind of similarly, like, it was, the girl did give a specific example. It was a story about a time that a friend had stolen her homework and submitted it as her own, and then she forgives the friend. So that's kind of like,
Right.
and that's her example. And it gets at this, it gets at part of the quote, I think. It gets at you just keep loving people and keep loving them even though they're mistreating you.
But not the redemptive power piece.
Yeah, and not that idea of like someone who is like, yeah, so far on the other side, that's like
Right.
a friend who's mistreated you
Right.
that you forgive.
Right.
So it's another, and that is a very specific example, and it was very developed.
Right.
I
So
think they could go the other way too. I've had students like, no, I don't think that this can happen because I couldn't do it. And for me, the question was, because you couldn't do it yourself, does that not make it possible? Does that mean universally it can never happen? So I think having them clarify their thinking that way, that's what I would ask for.
which might be an important distinction in religion, as we said, right?
Right.
Because it's less about you laying out your personal belief statement here than it is like the redemption is a concept we have learned about and you are required to show that you understand the concept itself.
But I mean, I do think this personal response piece, like, I think it's something that students don't have to do a lot in school. Like, we don't often ask them to write about their opinion, and so it is something that they're really, like, I think they're really weak at, and so we are trying to give them opportunities to, like, write, like, the they say, I say that, I said, it's not just like a 2-sentence, here's my opinion. It's like, here's a well-formulated paragraph that gives 2 reasons or 2 examples and explains it. And so, like, I think, like, this does show an area of growth kind of across the board of where students, which is funny, because, like, the opinion question would normally be, like, the fluff question, what people don't think is important, but, like, is important, and giving students like ways to access that, I think is important. And I think some students, like, I do think that student just like struggles to formulate an opinion, and so like, that is something that needs to keep being worked at.
Okay,
So she didn't score high because she struggles to formulate and articulate an opinion.
I agree.
Even with the greatest, even if I said, write an opinion sentence, give a reason, explain your reason, give another reason, like, some students would have a hard time even giving a reason or giving an example.
okay.
Yeah.
And that's example and reason. I think students sometimes conflate the
Yeah.
two or don't know
Mhm.
how there is a reason for an example.
Right.
That matches.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with him because I believe he is right about individuals and enemies and the redemptive power, period.
Right, she just like
She just
restated,
rewrote the
Yeah.
sentence.
I agree with him because he's right.
yeah.
Essentially.
But this is not, like, for her, this is not new. Like, when I asked her to write her opinion, this is like oftentimes what I get.
So I hear opinion, example, and reasoning, and knowing the difference between each. So in reteaching this student or students like this, what are the pieces of that reteach to get that practice? Because the student will continue to struggle,
Yeah.
but needs to develop.
I think that's something where we can go back to the, like, the they say, I say, and say, like, here's a good time when you did that.
Okay.
Like, what makes this different? I think for that, like, I didn't hear her voice in there at all, right? She was just kind of parroting what was written. And so, like, trying to find an example of where she actually gives an opinion.
So you would find of her work,
Yeah.
a place where she has done it,
Yeah.
and say, here now, use this as your exemplar,
Yeah,
and do it here.
yeah,
Okay,
that could be an option.
okay.
Because hopefully she'd be able to access her own writing in a way that maybe, like, if I gave her Joseph's, she wouldn't be able to, like, quite see herself in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good point of like, exemplars are only helpful as much as they are accessible.
Yeah.
Okay. Harry, your thought on like reteaching, so like a student who didn't get explanation, reasoning, like even this part, like whether it's the opinion or being able to explain redemptive power or, you know, miss the transform or change, or what would your reteaching, what steps would that look like?
I would want to break down the question and just walk them through. Could we break this into chunks? So as you're answering the question, what pieces are there? So there's the explain portion. Let's identify in your answer where you did that or didn't do that. And then the defend, and then use an example. So maybe breaking down the language of what does defense look like when we defend an opinion.
Okay.
And then have them work with a non-content related question. Let's defend your opinion on something else. Let's break down that opinion. And so they build one from scratch. Let's model that same sort of thinking in this response now.
Okay.
Then also asking them what they felt they did or didn't do. And maybe there's a misconception on their part. I didn't get it, I didn't know.
Yeah.
So beginning there, okay, let's talk about that first.
Because I think you're right, like, we did ask them to do a lot in this question. I don't think it's, like, necessarily too hard, but it is a lot. So there are some students who, like, maybe were like, I don't know that, I can't do that. But I feel really good about that piece. Or they're totally even missing this piece. So, like, verbally walking through everything that the question is asking them to do, so they can kind of self-identify, like, oh wait, I don't even know what you're asking there.
So that's even just for both of them, like laying out what is, like I as a student reading this, what is the requirement of what I'm being asked to do?
Right.
How would you do that in the reteach that is the student thinking through and not you telling them?
I would want them to point to it on that, where did you do that? Show me. And if they can't, okay, is that piece missing?
Do you think they can identify, like can she see
Well, she can
the
see
difference
that letter matches up with that letter matches up with that letter.
in her response?
Yeah.
Yeah. But can she see, does she know her gap? And if she doesn't?
I mean, like, to the opinion piece, she does. Like, she's told me she hates, I don't like writing my opinion, I can't do this, it's too hard. So, like, I think she knows her gap there.
Okay.
It's funny, because she comes off as a
Rather opinionated
Right.
student, yeah.
And then, yeah,
She comes
verbally, you
know.
have no issues with that.
I know.
It's just, a strength.
Yeah. But, But I also think if I sat her down and said like, summarize the quote verbally to me now, she would kind of get like flustered and be like, I don't know. So like, I think she would recognize her gap,
Okay.
yeah.
I think for the defense of an opinion is the why of it. And, I don't know, I'm a sucker for a metaphor, so I always, I draw from my own personal life. Mom gives you instructions and you ask her why, and you never get the why. We're gonna give a strong why. Mom always says, because I said so. That's never enough for us. You've gotta make your, and that may not be workable for every kid, they may look at me weird, which is fairly typical. But I wanna simplify that, the why of the defense of it.
So if we're thinking about what the reteach would look like, I heard finding a student exemplar of their own work where they have done the full example and reason, and could then use that as their own model, like their own model paper, and apply to the MLK quote. And then also breaking down each piece of it and having them verbally explain with a separate kind of example, right?
Mhm.
And then apply. So really a practice kind of round before they're going into, because the difficulty is the thinking through the example and reasoning.
And a lot of our students too will say, I didn't know how to say it. And so I said, well, tell me now.
Yeah.
And they'll say it out loud, and I'll say, that's exactly what you should have said.
Right.
Well, I know how to write that. Write what you just said word for
Yeah.
word. And so I think there is this sort of, I must adopt student speak now. I must become the scholar. And they struggle to find the words when the words that you're hearing in your head are just fine.
Right.
And again, it's not true in every student's case.
But I do think that, I would say out of the probably 3 of my students who didn't pass, I bet if I spoke to them, they would be
Mhm.
fine, but because it's writing, they're just jumping all over the place,
Mhm.
which is hard, because they need to know how to write. It's hard because you want, if they know it, you want them to pass. Yeah,
It's a good starting spot for a reassessment,
yeah,
because then I think they feel a little bit victorious.
yeah.
You know it, I recognize you know it. Now, it's a simple task of hopefully transforming what's in here to the paper. And,
And can I ask the other thing, so we're talking about like basically being able to support reasoning in
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah.
And part of what we talked about earlier was the content, right? Like pulling that content piece through, like which part of the Pascal mystery and where is that? So what part of the reteach ensures that like that content piece of, like we talked about the nuances of redemption, right? Like that it can apply to change, to transform, you know, what that looks like.
Well, I think like if a student isn't passing like the writing portion of the test, I think they're gonna like at least have to do number 1, demonstrate number 1 again, which is that content piece. So like reteaching is going to have to talk through like, here's what we learned, here's that kind of initial explained question. Like, let's make sure we're all on the same page. And then like also, then why are we using this quote to kind of talk about it? So like helping them recognize the quote is connected to what we're learning. And isn't just like this separate weird MLK quote that they have to talk about.
I think the challenge too in a reassessment would be, do you simply have them rehash the same quote?
Yeah,
To the point
probably
where
not.
it no longer means
Yeah.
anything and they're just,
Right.
Yeah, you're really doing it.
it might as well be in Chinese, because, I mean, they're just, until you give me the approval, I think the quote stops meaning something, and they stop analyzing, and they're just
You need to
reformatting.
transfer anyway, right?
Right.
Right.
You know, they have to show, if they talk through it, if they use it, if they're kind of checking their sentence with you, it's not really showing mastery, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, breaking it down in such a way that I can give you a new quote, and you can do it.
Okay. So kind of planning forward, what does this teach you about like, because you'll have questions like this and then prep for like the end of the year, you know, that they can show end of 10th grade mastery, ready to jump into 11th grade, like what pieces are in place in the next unit to like be the next step forward in that. So like what did you, thinking through this, how does that impact your planning and your teaching for what is necessary? Like what gap you can close in upcoming instruction for these students?
Well, I think a big one, and this isn't the immediate, so this isn't the unit we just started, but this will be the following unit, is our debate unit, which like is obviously rooted in, here's an opinion and a reason, whether it's what I believe or not, because we assign teams, but hopefully that for some students, like this whole opinion and reason and example thing, like we do 4 pretty hefty debates.
Mhm.
So you would hope that that format can kind of begin to close that in some ways. And also they're writing argumentative papers in English class right now, the sophomores, so like that also across the curriculum is kind of working on that skill.
And I think in the debates, they hear, and that's sort of the
They-
summative thing, but I think hearing, they recognize right away when someone does not defend an opinion,
Right.
and they jump all over it.
How do they know what it is? Like, what is it that they can recognize to know when it's lacking, and then how can they apply that to themselves?
I think some of them, they don't hear it right away. Like Alondra, I don't think is gonna hear it right away, but she'll hear other people's response, right? So she's hearing someone respond to someone for not having it.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
there's also the evaluative piece. They've given me their opinion, and I've got to decide if that's meaningful or destructive to my argument. So I think maybe the competition brings it a little bit out.
And there are moments, the way we format it, they're like checking in with their group, like they're consulting their group about what the group just said.
So it
and
requires that they analyze the
Yeah,
opinions
there's
of
a lot of
others
time
and
for
not
them
just
to-
their own.
Yeah, there's a lot of time for them to
So
check
how
in.
can I arm myself with something to defeat their argument, and I think without even realizing it, they're going with the why of it,
Then how can they then
right?
know that that's what they're doing, right? So you know that they've met it, how do they know that they've met it? Like, what's their cue? You know what I mean? Like, that they have then internalized, oh, I gave an example and with reasoning that was sound and related to my claim. That they're like having that internal process, like, I am good at giving my own opinion, I know how to do this. You know what I mean? Like that.
I think the challenge is that I've had post-game sort of wrap up, and they have to get a score, like who did what and when, but that doesn't necessarily hit all 27 participants.
Sure.
So there is that opportunity for some to hear, oh, scored a basket, so to speak. That was kind of nice, but
I mean, they get feedback because I can't remember the unit, it has been a year, but they're only assessed one of the 4 debates as a standard. The other 3, they're sort of like participants but not being assessed as a test. And so like they do get like specific feedback after the debates of like, even if they didn't verbalize their arguments, part of their homework is writing argument, reason.
Okay.
And so like perhaps they didn't speak it, but are they able to write it?
Can you think what prompt you have in mind? You're thinking ahead, like a prompt that is working or
From
will,
like that
but
unit?
No, because you haven't looked at it.
Well, no, one of them is like, would Jesus approve of monasticism? Like, like, would Jesus be okay with people going off and living by themselves and praying 24 hours a day? Like, that's a question. And so some students would come up with the argument of like what we learned this week, like,
right.
no, Jesus gave the Great Commission that said, go out and make disciples of all nations. That's my evidence, so like my explanation would be like he wanted us to spread his word, and if people close off, you know, like that would be an example.
Okay.
And they're able to do that, they're able
Mhm.
to like, and we give them texts to look at, and so they're not just popping up with ideas out of thin air, but.
And maybe the magic there is that maybe it's in their age to be critical. So, and here, maybe it doesn't seem critical.
Yeah.
You're defending a point of view, but if we're talking about evaluating monasticism, they're looking for holes.
Yeah.
They're in debate, they're looking for holes, and I think that there's a little bit different there. Just simply, what do you think and why? I agree with him because he's right.
Yeah.
But if
Right.
they have to trump someone else's opinion,
If it's a game.
yeah, then it's like,
Gamify it.
Yeah. for real.
evaluate, and we're not asking them to evaluate Martin Luther King, so maybe there's that piece of,
Sure.
everything's an
Yeah,
argument, and I hope they see
evaluate
that, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
that idea.
So thank you for all this thinking through.
Yeah.
Thinking back to like the first objective,
Yeah.
like of being able to analyze student work to address the gaps and then plan forward. What are you holding as an action step moving from like what you saw in student work that leads to your action steps moving forward?
Would this be directed towards specifically like reteaching, or is this just in general?
I
Like,
think
is
it could be either. So like this kid has to
Yeah.
redo, I mean, Alondra has to redo this standard.
Right.
But in terms of like teaching, planning, whole class, like what is in your mind like remaining, like this is the essential thing to keep in my mind as I'm moving forward, or to adjust instruction, or to maintain an instruction.
I think it's the breakdown of those steps in a response. Especially with this one, where they knew in advance what they were gonna be asked. Did you fully understand each part? When it comes down to explain, defend, use an example, I do identify those 3 steps. So, I don't know, in the future, maybe having them, can you tell me the 3 things you'll have to do? Can you highlight those things in your pre-writing? So, I think we wanna be careful that we weren't super, like you said, super structured in the sense that they should be able to identify these things for themselves rather than us as freshman teachers putting everything in a box, fill out your little boxes,
Right.
put your boxes together, it's almost like a worksheet.
Yep.
Them being fluent and coherent in their ideas through their own skill. But
Can I say I think that's really fair reflection, to not think I need to overly scaffold in a way that these students who, many of them clearly can do that without, right? So to
Right.
not shackle them to an additional day of box filling in.
Right.
I mean, is it thinking to the tattoos on the heart?
That's it, I was gonna say, like, we need to keep in mind that, like, I think students were able to succeed on that question because of that tattoos on the heart assignment. And so, like, how can we make sure that we're doing something similar with our upcoming unit? And I, right now, sitting here, have no idea what that means or what that looks like.
Yeah.
But keeping that in mind, that we did sort of like a summative capstone. It was a group assignment where they were asked to like transfer, very much transfer knowledge.
Yeah.
And like, we were able to check up on that, like in the moment.
So really there was a very clear practice transfer,
Yeah.
and then a feedback loop if students missed it.
Yeah.
Okay. Which then that could be the opportunity for scaffolding, but only if required, and students
Yeah.
can't do it without it.
And the way, I don't know if this was the way that you did it, the way I did it was like, because they were working in groups, it wasn't even like, it didn't even really give them an opportunity to miss it, like I did, but the questions were like written in such a way that they would struggle instead of really miss it. And so like, because they were struggling, they were able to call me over and we were able to like talk through it.
Okay.
But yeah, so like, but that sort of assignment I think is key. I don't know what that looks like for our next unit, but.
I just wonder if there's a sort of pre-debate that doesn't happen out loud, or they have debates within their own group first.
I'm even thinking the unit we just started though, before the debate unit, but yeah.
Thank you. This was very helpful. I'd love to hear any feedback of what you felt was useful about this.
Yeah.
And what maybe would be more useful.
No, I think it's good, like we kind of started out this with saying like it's super hard when the standard is like describe redemption, right? Like, and so for Perry and I to like sit down and say like what is a meaningful way that we can have students describe redemption? What does that look like? And what does it look like that isn't giving a multiple choice and short answer test every single unit, right? Because we don't want to do the assess in the exact same way every unit, because that's not fair to students who struggle with writing, that they're gonna feel like, I fail every single religion test because I have to write every single religion test. So it's just a lot to balance. But we're doing it.
My only feedback for going into this would be, I kind of came in a little bit shuffling for things. I got my feedback for myself will come in a little bit better prepared to have those highs and lows ready to go, so I apologize for that.
Yeah.
Kind of paper showing me.
Thank you both for being willing to go through. I think this was helpful for me, and if I were to do this again, I think I want to move through the exemplars more quickly and then go to the action steps and spend most of our time on the action steps. Although I think the sitting with the exemplars for what we did was really useful.
I think, yeah, we had to.
Yeah.
And we also picked, I think if we had picked a different question, like, we could have moved through the exemplars faster.
But I'm glad we picked a question that definitely included transfer.
Yeah.
And definitely was a higher order thinking. Like I'm glad we isolated a key one thing to look at rather than trying to take this whole assessment. So like, I appreciate you adding the end of analysis, like that would be
Yeah.
a another thing. So I'm wondering like, how do we take what is useful in like student data that's right in front of us and being able to like capture that piece of like, what did I ask, what did I do in teaching that students succeeded, what am I asking of them in order to succeed, what am I seeing in data to see if they did or not, and like getting that to apply faster, right? Because we can't take an hour, we took an hour.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't know how these questions would apply to multiple choice questions, like I don't know how we would really work through a multiple choice, but this seems to make sense for those short answer questions. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks. Emily, any feedback?